What's the worst pain you could experience in your life? Probably watching one of my videos, but for the longest time, humans have dreamt up and imagined more and more sinister ways in order to inflict the most pain possible on the human body. Torture is defined as the act of deliberately inflicting severe physical or psychological suffering on someone as a punishment or in order to fulfill some desire of the torturer or to force some action from the victim. So, from having your insides cut out and burnt in front of you to being burnt alive, there's been plenty of ways to make your victim scream out in pain. I'm Jamie's Day, your favourite day of the week, and this is 6 historical torture methods that will either make you feel sick or get you off. Your choice. But before we begin this magical video, make sure you do leave a like on the video, and if you haven't yet, make sure you do subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. Otherwise, you'll be facing a trip to the rack. And speaking of the rack, that leads us into our first torture method. The rack. In the rack, the victim is tied down while some mechanical device, usually a crank or turning wheel, tightens the rope, stretching the victim's body until the joints are dislocated. Once you're strapped onto the rack, your limbs aren't going anywhere. With each turn, they're stretched further and further apart. Either your mind or body will break first, but when your body does break first, it happens in a series of horrifying stages. First, your limbs dislocate, which means your bones pop out of their joints. You'll know when this happens because you'll hear a loud crack. This is followed by the snapping of cartilage and the ligaments, and then if you don't get taken off, your bones also snap, like popcorn popping in a microwave, but much more painful. The rack was a typically drawn out affair and was even spiced up with other torture methods by the torturer to make things more exciting. You were either burnt with torches or candles, and if you could feel your hands and feet at this point, your toe and fingernails were ripped out. Kinky. Medieval people saw this punishment and thought, how can we make this even more painful? Spikes. Spikes is always the answer. As the wheels were turning, the spikes would dig into your back and spinal cord, so if the damage to your limbs didn't paralyse you, the damage to your spine would. The rack was so gruesome that even seeing the rack in action was enough to make people confess or break. Gunpowder plot conspirator Guy Fawkes was subjected to the rack in order to force a confession about his co-conspirators, and his signature before and after show how much of a broken man he was after a ride on the rack. It is said that while during signing his signature, he actually passed out from the pain. Torture fact number 1. I'm not sure why I'm so happy about this, because torture is gruesome as fuck. But anyway, torture fact number 1. Torture was used to extract confessions from people. The courts used it to make people confess to their crimes. But in their own sinister way, the courts knew that any confession under torture had no legal meaning. So they had to wait within 24 hours of the victim not being tortured to make them confess. But if they didn't confess, they would get tortured again to make them confess. It's a cruel world. Anyway, onto something even more crueler. Number 2, the Brazen Bull. The Brazen Bull was a hollow brass structure crafted to resemble a real bull. Victims were placed inside and the door was shut, sealing them in. The fire would be lit around the bull, and as the victim succumbed to the searing heat inside, he would thrash about and scream in agony. The movement and sound muted by the bull's mass made the apparatus appear alive, and the sounds inside sounded like a real bull due to how the tubes were organised. This effect created an additional amusement for the audience and served the added benefit of distancing themselves from the brutality of the torture, since they couldn't directly see the victim. According to legend, when the bull was reopened after a body was charred, the victim's scorched bones then shone like jewels and were made into bracelets. Legend has it that this device was invented by a Greek named Perillus for a tyrant named Phalaris of Agrimentum. I'm going to struggle with those. Stories allege that after finishing construction on the execution device, Perillus said to Phalaris, his screams will come to you through the pipes as the tenderest, most pathetic, most melodious of bellowings. He believed he would receive a reward for his invention. Instead, the tyrant was disgusted by these words and ordered its horn sound system to be tested by Perillus himself, tricking him into getting into the bull. When he entered, he was immediately locked in and the fire was set, so that Phalaris could hear the sound of his screams. But before Perillus could die, Phalaris opened the door and took him away. After freeing him from the bull, Phalaris is said to have then taken Perillus to the top of the hill, thrown him off, killing him. Phalaris himself is then claimed to have been killed by the Brazen Bull when he was overthrown by his rebellious subjects. Well, that was a tongue twister. Number 3, bamboo torture. Between munching on bamboo and practicing kung fu, pandas also use their bamboo sticks to inflict extreme punishment on people. That is of course wrong, but after World War II, stories circulated of Japanese soldiers inflicting bamboo torture upon Allied prisoners of war, where the victim was tied down in a secure place above a young bamboo shoot. Bamboo can grow a few feet per day, and over several days, the sharp, fast-growing shoot would first puncture, then completely penetrate the victim's body, eventually emerging through the other side, causing a slow and extremely painful death. In 2008, the Mythbusters team tested if this was in fact plausible. They made a torso using ballistic gelatin, a material which requires the same amount of pressure to puncture as the human skin, and the bamboo grew right through it and reached over 10 feet, so they deemed the torture technique very much plausible. However, it is still unknown whether it happened. Torture fact number 2. As well as being used to extract crimes, torture was also used to deter criminals from committing a crime. It is said that young children were even hanged for stealing from the market. Number 4, the Pear of Anguish. Moving on to an item that now goes inside you instead of through you, the Pear of Anguish was a pear-shaped device, funnily enough, that was inserted into any orifice the torturer could find, mainly the anus. The screw is then turned and the head of the pear begins to expand. The pressure begins to build and it feels like the metal is going to rip through the delicate tissue. And in fact, it might. But the goal is not to puncture the flesh, which could quickly lead to a fatal bleeding. Instead, the pear is meant to stretch the anus as far as possible, and as it stretches, it rips the skin, overloads the sensitive nerve endings, and produces searing agony. However, it seems from this there is no such evidence of it being used as a torture device, but the idea of it being inside you has sparked the imagination of many people. Weird people. Number 5, thumbscrews. One method that did actually exist is the thumbscrews. You weren't likely to die from their use, but they created unendurable agony. The device consisted of 3 upright metal bars between which the thumbs were placed, and the wooden bar slid down along the metal bars, pressing the thumbs against the bottom. The crushing bars were sometimes lined with sharp metal points to puncture the thumbs and inflict greater pain into the nail beds. A screw pressed the wood bar downward, crushing the thumbs painfully, and the thumbscrews were an elaboration of an earlier device known as the Pillywinks, which could crush all 10 fingers and resembled a nutcracker. This was also used to crush the big toes of people. Torture fact number 3. The information supporting the ineffectiveness of torture goes back centuries. A lot of victims would make something up if it meant the torture would stop, and many torture survivors report revealing false or incomplete information since their goal was to satisfy the torturer and end the sufferings, not to reveal the information they had. Moving on to our last one now. Number 6, rat torture. Many people naturally feel a sense of fear and revulsion towards rats, and animals will chew through nearly anything, including human flesh. And that makes them the perfect tools for torture, especially if the torturer knew how to use them. One of the most fiendish forms of rat torture involves placing a rat inside a half cage and atop a restrained person's abdomen. Then the cage is slowly heated, the rats start to rush around, desperately searching for a way out. The metal cage is too hard to bite because of the heat, but the victim's abdomen is not. With the sharp claws and teeth, the rat quickly gnaws its way through the victim's bowels, causing excruciating pain and terror. Of course, rat torture doesn't always need to be so complicated to be effective. Tower of London had a room referred to as the Rat's Dungeon. The room was a pitch-black cell that sat underneath the waterline of the River Thames. As the river rose, rats swept up from its shores and would float in and begin to nibble on the flesh of the prisoners in the dungeon. This was the most common way rats had been used in torture. Prisoners were locked inside a confined space with a group of rats, and in a small room, there's no way to avoid them. The prisoners would slowly be driven mad as the rats gnawed through all their limbs, and in many ways, the fear of the rat torture was more useful to the torturers than the pain itself. Our last torture fact for today is torture fact number 4. The consequences of torture reach far beyond immediate pain. Many victims suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, which includes symptoms such as flashbacks, severe anxiety, insomnia, nightmares, depression, and memory lapses. Torture victims often feel guilt and shame, triggered by the humiliation they have endured. Many feel that they have betrayed themselves or their friends and family. All such symptoms are normal human responses to abnormal and inhuman treatment. This is shown extremely well in Game of Thrones when Theon Greyjoy is tortured by Ramsay Bolton. So there wraps up our list of 6 torture devices used in historical times. I hope you've all enjoyed it, and I hope you've all learnt something with the torture facts today. I'm not sure why I was so happy about saying them, but I felt we needed the emotion and enthusiasm. Anyway, make sure you do leave a like if you haven't yet, and if you haven't subscribed, make sure you do, otherwise you're getting sent to the rack, as I said. Anyway, if you did enjoy this, make sure you leave a comment saying if you did enjoy it, because we could do more. There has been more than 6 torture methods in the history of humankind. So if you want more of this, we can add another 6 to the list. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed today. I've been Jamie's Day, your favourite day of the week, and this was 6 historical torture methods that could make you feel sick or get you off. Your choice. That won't be in the title, it'll be something else. Anyway, I'll see you all later. Peace.